Okay, so today, relatively interactive, a little bit of theory, a little bit of what I call my PTSD cathartic moments. So I'm going to be sharing with you something that I'm still not quite over. And I've got a couple of ex-colleagues in the room who are actually going to be able to relate to. Deanie and I had a bit of this together actually, and as did Miranda and I. But we're going to go through that. So I am going to talk about what purpose and vulnerability have in common. And if you haven't worked it out yet, it's actually all about trust. They are both key elements of trust. And the question we ask ourselves is, how do we use both those elements in one go to build trust? That's the kind of question that I was asking myself. In order to build this story for you, I need to tell you about a time not so long ago in my career where I think probably I had one of the biggest failures I've ever had. Now, I'm not hand on heart being all gratuitous and whatever and saying it was all my fault. It actually wasn't. This was probably one of the most complex projects around, and there were many factors that made this project fail. But there were also many factors that myself and my team possibly could have done differently. So I want to share with you that journey that I've been on and tie it to how I've changed my mind around how we build trust with communities. So this job was a job called Perth Freight Link. It was a $1.9 billion road project in Western Australia, and a lot of people will tell you, dropped from the sky with funding from the federal and state governments. At the time, I was an executive director at Main Roads in Western Australia, and I had been brought in after this project was announced. Main Roads have not traditionally had a central communications and strategy team, so my job was to come in and look at the way Main Roads does communication and engagement, change up a few things, which probably pissed Miranda off no end, and try and make a difference. And I believe we actually did, and I'm very proud of the work that we did at Main Roads. At the same time, my job was to, I still remember the MD at the time, that said to me, Perth Freight Link's coming, that's going to be a pig. And I didn't know anything about it at the time, and I went, okay, great, we'll deal with that. So this project dropped from the sky, and I can tell you from the word go, it was an absolute disaster for many reasons. And I'm going to get to that. But it caused me many, many sleepless nights. At the time, it caused me sleepless nights because I couldn't work out how to get through the barriers that I was facing. As an executive director, so you'd like to think that there weren't that many barriers, but there were barriers. And afterwards, it's also caused me sleepless nights because I continue to think, what could we have done differently? How could we have changed this so that it actually succeeded? Ultimately, the job was cancelled, the contracts were cancelled, the contracts were awarded, and then the contracts were cancelled. I say that's because of politics. Politics was in the way of this project from the word go. However, politics only got in the way, I believe, because we lost the trust of the community. And what's really interesting here is that we didn't lose the trust of the majority of the community. We lost the trust of the small minority of the community that had the louder voice and was able to cancel the contract. But the silent majority that actually supported the project were quite disappointed by it. Politics got on board, happened to be around an election. They used cancelling contracts as an election commitment. Boom, there goes a whole bunch of cash and a really good project, in my personal opinion. So, I'm going to take you down a couple of rabbit holes over the next little while. We're going to talk a little bit, we're going to go into some kind of psychology stuff, and you're going to go, where is this woman going? Hopefully I'll tie it all together. The message that I want to get across, though, is quite a simple one. And that is, what every single person in this room does really matters. And too often, we have no voice at the top table. Too often, the people making the decisions are making decisions without any consideration of social risk. And I've been in a couple of sessions these last couple of days, and we've had these discussions over and over again. But the message I want to get to you is, we've got to think about not just how we do what we do, and not just why we do it. So I'm not talking Simon Sinek, right? We all know that we're in it for the positive intent. What I'm talking about is why we choose to do what we do when we do it. Why we make the decisions to engage when we engage, how we engage, and how we can get things wrong. Strategy really, really matters. And in big infrastructure projects, it's essential. And if we go in without strategy and we start ticking boxes with regards to property condition reports and town halls and CRGs without thinking about the why and why we're doing what we're doing, then we run the risk of getting ourselves into trouble. So I'm kind of challenging us to think bigger than our everyday and think about the role of the strategy that we put in place before we even get out there. And I heard Blast, her name's gone now, from New South Wales Health. She won one of the awards. Belinda, thank you. Talking this morning, it took 3 years to get to before the shovel went in the ground. That's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. This wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. So I also want to leave us with the fact that often as community engagement practitioners, I call us the producers. Never have been and never want to be the actor. I am not on stage. I'm the one behind stage, producing the leaders who are there to tell the consistent stories. So we have quite a lot of power, if you like, and we need to utilise that power. We need to be able to build the trust of our leaders so that they trust in us and the advice that we give them. Because if our leaders don't trust in us and the advice that we give them, we're never going to meet some of these pillars of trust. Am I making sense so far? Cool. If our projects aren't trusted, they will ultimately cost more. They might even get cancelled, and they will take more time. So we don't talk about, well, and this is a personal opinion, and I'm talking about engaging throughout organisations and to the top. We don't talk about equality and community should have a voice and IAP2 principles. We talk about those other places. To me, to the leaders, it's about risk. It's about financial risk. It's about program delay, because that's the language they know, right? So that's the way we can help them understand what the risk is that's associated with not understanding the strategy behind engagement. So now, segue. Renee Brown. Who's heard of Renee Brown? Imagine that might be why a lot of you guys are in this room, because you're thinking, what the hell? Where's she gone? This video that I'm going to steal with pride, and I've had quite a lot of I've researched to make sure TEDx are happy with me to do this, is one of the videos that started to make my meandering thoughts around what went wrong with, I called it Perth Freightlink, but I'm going to now start to call it Row 8. It's the same project, part of the problem, right? Confusion, right there. She actually started to get me thinking about where I could have take some learnings or what we could have done differently here. So she's had 44 million views. This woman has an awesome job. She studies courage, vulnerability and shame for a living. Go figure. She gets into people's heads and understands what drives these three elements. What she spoke about really spoke to me. And one of the things that I really liked, I'm going to play you a real little snippet in a second, is she's the kind of person that likes to tie things up into boxes and have a black and white answer. And I was like, yes, that's me. But what we do can't be tied up into little boxes. It's really messy, and we have to be comfortable in the messy. And this is where I first started, so I'm just going to play you this for a second. Hopefully it works.
So I was very excited about this, and so I thought, you know what? This is the career for me, because I am interested in some messy topics, but I want to be able to make them not messy. I want to understand them. I want to hack into these things that I know are important and lay the code out for everyone to see. So where I started was with connection, because by the time you're a social worker for 10 years, what you realize is that connection is why we're here.
Okay, so at this point in the video, I'm going, yep, cool. I get it, I'm going to tie this up into boxes, I'm going to get the answer, it's all about connection. And I'm looking back at my life and I'm thinking to myself, so when I was first in marketing, it's about connection. So my first job was, like I said, Cuervo Tequila and Southern Comfort in Edinburgh, right? And this is about connecting with the younger people at bars and clubs. I get that. Then it was malt whiskey, and this is about connecting to, I don't even know if this is going to be racist. I don't mean this to be racist, right? But rich Asians, because they love malt whiskey, and how we connect to them and how we adapt to them. And then, fast forward a few years, and I was in marketing and I was in advertising, and advertising is all about connection. So I'm starting to think, yep, okay, how do we build more connection into community engagement? Because obviously it's about connection. Life is about connection. So that's kind of where I started. But Renee goes on and she says, as she started studying connection and what makes and helps people connect, she came across this concept of shame. And she calls shame the fear of disconnection, and the fact that people carry a lot of shame around. And that led her research to identifying what she calls two different types of people. One type of person is the person that says, am I good enough? And the other type of people are the people that are wholehearted. And the only difference between the two types of people, the ones that are wholehearted have opened themselves up to being vulnerable. So this is really interesting stuff, right? And you're still going, oh, where is she heading with this? But for those who are wholehearted, there are some characteristics that she describes. So wholehearted people are courageous. They're willing to put themselves on the line. They are compassionate. They show that they care about others as well as themselves. They are connected, or value connection is a characteristic of them, and connection being collaboration and also the things that, the way that we value interdependencies. So it's not just collaboration, it's actually the interdependencies and this, the 1 + 1 = 3 in this scenario. But this concept of vulnerability, they are completely open to vulnerability. And Renee talks about the fact that she really struggled with that because she wants to be a wholehearted person, but she's a researcher and being vulnerable, she's an academic, being vulnerable, not in the rule book. What is this all about? How can I deal with it? So at this point in time, I'm going to assume that we all want to be the wholehearted people. Is that a fair enough assumption? Anyone here just happy with being am I good enough kind of people? No. Anyone in here struggle with being vulnerable? If you say no, you're going to be lying, right? So not all of us, but some of us. I'm going to talk more about courage, compassion, and connection in a little while, but I want to put to bed this concept of vulnerability and where it actually comes into building trust, because they do merge together. I'm going to now show you 8 minutes of video, because my voice gets boring after a while. But I think this is really important, and I'm hopefully going to show you why it's important to what we do once it's played. For those who have seen this video, my apologies, but I find every time I watch it, I get something else out of it anyway, so.
Trying to understand what the wholehearted, what the choices they were making, and what are we doing with vulnerability? Why do we struggle with it so much? Am I alone in struggling with vulnerability? No. So this is what I learned. We numb vulnerability. When we're waiting for the call, it was funny, I sent something out on Twitter and on Facebook that says, how would you define vulnerability? What makes you feel vulnerable? And within an hour and a half, I had 150 responses. Because I wanted to know, what's out there. Having to ask my husband for help because I'm sick and we're newly married. Initiating sex with my husband. Initiating sex with my wife. Being turned down, asking someone out. Waiting for the doctor to call back, getting laid off, laying off people. This is the world we live in. We live in a vulnerable world. And one of the ways we deal with it is we numb vulnerability. And I think there's evidence, and it's not the only reason this evidence exists, but I think that it's a huge cause. We are the most in debt, obese, addicted, and medicated adult cohort in U.S. history. The problem is, and I learned this from the research, that you cannot selectively numb emotion. You can't say, here's the bad stuff. Here's vulnerability, here's grief, here's shame, here's fear, here's disappointment. I don't want to feel these. I'm going to have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin. I don't want to feel these. And I know that's knowing laughter. I hack into your lives for a living. I know that's, God. You can't numb those hard feelings without numbing the other affects or emotions. You cannot selectively numb. So when we numb those, we numb joy. We numb gratitude. We numb happiness. And then we are miserable and we are looking for purpose and meaning. And then we feel vulnerable. So then we have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin. And it becomes this dangerous cycle. One of the things that I think that we need to think about is why and how we numb. And it doesn't just have to be addiction. The other thing we do is we make everything that's uncertain certain. Religion has gone from a belief in faith and mystery to certainty. I'm right, you're wrong, shut up. That's it. Just certain. The more afraid we are, the more vulnerable we are, the more afraid we are. This is what politics looks like today. There's no discourse anymore. There's no conversation. There's just blame. You know how blame is described in the research? A way to discharge pain and discomfort. We perfect, if there's anyone who wants their life to look like this, it would be me. But it doesn't work, because what we do is we take fat from our butts and put it in our cheeks. Which just, I hope in 100 years people will look back and go, wow. And we perfect, most dangerously, our children. Let me tell you what we think about children. They're hardwired for struggle when they get here. When you hold those perfect little babies in your hand, our job is not to say, look at her, she's perfect. My job is just to keep her perfect, make sure she makes the tennis team by 5th grade and fail by 7th grade. That's not our job. Our job is to look and say, you know what? You're imperfect and you're wired for struggle, but you are worthy of love and belonging. That's our job. Show me a generation of kids raised like that and we'll end the problems I think that we see today. We pretend that what we do doesn't have an effect on people. We do that in our personal lives. We do that corporate, whether it's a bailout, an oil spill, a recall. We pretend like what we're doing doesn't have a huge impact on other people. I would say to companies, this is not our first rodeo, people. We just need you to be authentic and real and say, we're sorry, we'll fix it. But there's another way, and I'll leave you with this. This is what I have found. To let ourselves be seen, deeply seen, vulnerably seen. To love with our whole hearts, even though there's no guarantee. And that's really hard. And I can tell you as a parent, that's excruciatingly difficult. To practice gratitude and joy in those moments of kind of terror when we're wondering, can I love you this much? Can I believe in this as passionately? Can I be this fierce about this? Just to be able to stop and instead of catastrophizing what might happen, to say, I'm just so grateful. Because to feel this vulnerable means I'm alive. And the last, which I think is probably the most important, is to believe that we're enough. Because when we work from a place, I believe, that says, I'm enough, then we stop screaming and start listening. We're kinder and gentler to the people around us, and we're kinder and gentler to ourselves. That's all I have.
So that is an awesome video. I encourage you to have a look at it if you haven't seen it before. But what I took from that was quite powerful, these 4 things. When we avoid vulnerability, we do 4 things. We numb, we make everything certain, we try and get everything perfect, and we pretend that it's not having an impact. So with row 8, this road project that I was talking about, what happened is that we removed all emotion from the communication material. We said nothing because nothing was certain. We said nothing because nothing was perfect. We did recognise that there was going to be an impact, but we probably didn't recognise it enough. So that started me going, okay, there's something going on here that I want to talk about. My team and I started almost begging the minister's office. Were you still there, Dee? Almost begging Dee to talk about clarity over certainty. We had to have a conversation with the community. Nothing was certain, but we had to tell them what we were doing to get certain. But we didn't. We continued this vacuum of information. And And this is what happened. It's a really long and complicated story, but here's just a little mini snippet.
As we said, the protest is certainly well underway at the moment. Some of the protesters here are also wearing masks on their faces, and they say that is to protect them from the asbestos which has been found on the Row 8 construction site. Main Roads has confirmed that. And that's one of the main reasons that they're down here this morning. They say that the dust from that is a public safety issue. The neighbours are also concerned about the dust being found on the site, and that it's also a risk to the workers that are clearing the land and the police and security guards that are having to police it. Now, the protest actually started a short distance away from the construction site, but as it's gone on, it's gotten closer to where it's all happening now. There are dozens of police here, also mounted police monitoring the situation. At the moment, they're trying to keep people away from the Row 8 construction site fence as much as they can. There's certainly, we've seen a couple that have managed to get inside, but for the most of the protesters here are complying, and we'll keep you updated on that as the situation changes.
So that was a joyful one of the many news things that happened, and the irony there is the people that were protesting were actually protesting against the road because of the pristine wetland area that it was going through, that we actually had found asbestos on because for 11 years the local residents had been using it as a tip. Bit of irony, but I might be a little bit biased. So the contracts were cancelled, a new government came in, and all of a sudden we were rehabilitating Row 8. The site was cleared, millions of dollars were spent. And I can tell you now that there is still no solution to the social problems that road was going to solve. The really dangerous safety risk and other problems that road was going to solve. I can see Joel sitting at the back. I've got to be really careful talking about this project. It's a very emotive project that some people really want it and some people really don't, right? And I know that you're from WA, so I'm always kind of thinking, have I got any Row 8 people in the room? But I'm sharing this with you because there's got to be a better way, right? No one wants a project to end up in that space. So I want to start exploring why projects fail and why projects succeed. And what we're going to do really quickly is have a look at some of your answers. Oh, do I not have Wi-Fi on, don't I? I thought the technology was all working way too well. Give me a second. Nothing beats the old personal hotspot. We'll let it kick in. I'll just make sure it's kicked in. I'm just going to get out of this for a second. There we are. Nick's iPhone has arrived. I'll go away. Okay, let's see what you guys said. This should work now. This should, man. I've checked it and it did work. It says contacting the server for information. It'd be so much easier just to have a show of hands when, technology, right? Okay, if it doesn't work, which it might, but we're just going to speed up the process. Who has been involved in a project that succeeds? Awesome. Who has been involved in a project that failed? Awesome. Wow. So what I want to do now is take a few minutes around your tables, and I'd like you to talk about what the characteristics were on the projects that failed and the projects that succeeded, and come up with 3 or 4. Now, one's going to be we did this, and the other one's going to be we didn't do this, right? So there's going to be a central characteristic that was either lifted or not lifted. But I'm really interested for us to explore as a group why a project was awesome and why a project failed. And rather than we didn't engage stakeholders, I want to think a little bit deeper as to what was it that why didn't we engage stakeholders? Does that make sense? So literally like 5 minutes, and maybe just nominate someone to feed that back to us. I'm not going to be able to go around the whole room, so I'll just be choosing some tables. Oh, look! It came up on my screen. Hang on, I'll show you. Wait a second. I need to drag this over? Will that work? Yeah. There you go. I'm not there yet. Oh no, sorry. Came in on budget. Came in on time on budget. The other one. Well, we saw with the show of hands. I'd really love to capture everyone's ideas. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to because we will end up running out of time. But I'm going to look for a volunteer to share a table's thoughts on why projects fail and why they succeed. Go on. You've got to catch this. You ready? Yeah, because it's a microphone.
Okay. I'll pick the key things. So we talked about a successful project with having good leadership and agencies working together and essentially being vulnerable to risk. And then the opposite of that is being too risk averse as a failure.
Right.
Another fail is when the ego gets in the way, so my way or highway.
Yeah.
And then, the next big one was when you don't talk, so then you're kind of creating this open space, and that's when, an unhappy community can come into the picture and take that silence and, they might just be creating stories or untrue things just to fill the space because nobody who actually wants to make a change or who has the voice in the project speaks.
When you create a vacuum, someone will fill it.
Yeah.
Awesome. One of the questions I haven't answered in my own brain yet is how do we get the silent minority to be louder? Because this world is so affected by the silent majority to be louder, because the world is so affected by the silent minority.
Thank you. We talked about a couple of positive projects that went well, and the common thing in both of those was having a project manager or leader who was consistent over a long period of time. So one of them was 12 years and the other one was 15 years, which isn't always possible. We found that for these two projects in particular, the fact that there was a consistent person that the community and stakeholders were dealing with, because we know that often communities don't change depending where the project is during that period.
Yeah.
And so having that consistent person that the people had the phone number and the email, they could call if there was rumours or they had a question, they could pick up the phone and call and get it quickly and easily sorted out. The project manager was knocking on doors in the community, regularly talking to people, and that really built that trust where the community and stakeholders felt that they've got our back.
Yeah.
They're not going to let us down. The lines of communication are open, we're informed, we know what's happening.
Yeah, great. And that's my point around the producer, because you just said the project manager was knocking on people's doors, right? Project managers who are either construction people or engineers aren't naturally happy with knocking on people's doors.
Yes.
But the impact of the project manager doing it rather than the community engagement person doing it is so much greater. That doesn't devalue us.
No.
It changes our role a little bit where we can. Who else? One more. You ready? Love that thing.
Ours ultimately stem from communication for the most part. So ensuring that leaders are informed with appropriate messaging, so that when they're out in community, they're clear on what's happening and the message that they're trying to get across. And the example provided when they're not clear, it goes downhill rapidly when there's uncertainty.
Yep.
That communication is targeted and in some cases at a granular sort of street by street level, and that people are brought along on the journey with open communication throughout the process. On the not well side, we talked about consultation for consultation's sake.
Yeah, ticking boxes.
Yeah, with an example of we need to consult. Why? Well, just because we do. It's part of the process.
Because the contract says we do.
Yeah, and a narrow voice informing the outcome of the project, meaning that there wasn't sufficient depth and variety of intelligence informing the right outcomes.
Great, thank you. So we're going to come back to these in a little while, but I appreciate that. You can throw that microphone back at me, hopefully I'll catch it. This is This is like how to make friends and influence people, break the microphone. One of the things I should say, by the way, because I'm taking a segue now from vulnerability to trust, is that I am not for a minute saying that Main Roads Western Australia or the state government of Western Australia should have shown vulnerability in the Row 80 situation. I don't think that is necessarily the right answer for that situation. But that's where I started, right? So what is the right answer if it's not vulnerability? And this is where we keep kind of exploring a little bit further. So what did I do with my clicker? I started exploring a few theories on trust and taking that kind of idea of vulnerability and well, you know, we can't really be vulnerable. You know, there's not many politicians out there that are happen to be vulnerable. We all currently, I don't know about you guys, but Jacinta is like the woman on the hill at the moment. Justin's up there as well in Canada. Even to a certain degree, Barack was as well, but he couldn't get anything done. Again, it depends on your politics, so probably best not to start there. But I found three different people that I could associate with. One is a book by Daniel Coyle called The Culture Code. I don't know if anyone's read that book. It's about team building and team collaboration and the power of a team. But he, in his book, talks about the power of vulnerability in leadership and how a leader who shows vulnerability will be a much stronger leader. So that was an interesting link. And this here, he says, the four most powerful words a leader can say. So I stuffed that up. And I agree with that. I fundamentally agree that when we as leaders can say, you know what, I've made a mistake. Back in my Diageo days, which was the tequila days, we had a corporate coach. Diageo were an amazing organisation to work for. They really focused on personal development. And we had this lady called Jill, and we used to call her Yoda because she was only about yay big. And working in Diageo at the time was like working in a cult, right? Because we had all this leadership development, but we had these mantras. And one of the mantras was, in light of new information, I reserve the right to change my mind. So it's okay to say that. I thought one thing, I've got more information, so it's okay for me to change my mind. And that's not dissimilar to this kind of, I stuffed that up. It doesn't get you off the hook. It doesn't mean to say you should be incompetent. It's just being vulnerable and open to being able to say, you know, I think I got that wrong. I started thinking to myself thoughts like, why bother engaging with minority groups who are never going to be happy? You know, Sandman's theory around what we do with minority groups and we use them as theatre and that kind of thing. I really like that. But I started thinking to myself, there's no point. If they're going to always hate you, why engage with them? I started thinking to myself, people just need to be led. They need to be told what to do. We shouldn't engage them if they're not going to be happy. Now, clearly all of these things were wrong, right? But this is where my head was going. But there is no black and white. So Daniel talks about vulnerability in teams. Brene Brown talks about vulnerability and shame. There's another guy who I am going to talk about in a second. His name's David Horsiger. He talks about the 8 pillars of trust, and we're going to go through those in just a second. And then I discovered a really interesting TED talk by a Harvard Business School professor called Frances Frey. And she talks about the triangle of trust. Does anyone know any of these names that I'm suggesting? Oh, seriously, it's a YouTube thing, right? So just go and have a look. I'm not an academic. But all this started me hypothesizing that the way we engage with people is different depending on where we are on the spectrum, the IAP2 spectrum. So the vulnerability and the kind of more open engagement, I was starting to think belongs in the collaborate and empower end of the spectrum, and the purpose and leadership belongs in the inform end of the spectrum. And I'm like, okay, this is cool. I think I'm getting somewhere now. I'm going to start implementing this in some of my strategies with, so I can avoid this ever happening again. So we'll keep going. So David Horsiger's 8 pillars of trust are these: consistency. Now I want to do something here. What did I do with that pen? Here. So if we look at what we just talked about, I heard a couple of people say numerous times, consistency, right, was a pillar of success. He talks about connection, those people who understand the power of collaboration and interdependencies. And remember that Renee talked about exactly the same thing. We talked about agencies working together. How often do agencies not work together? It drives me insane. We were in a session the other day, yesterday I think, and we were talking about, someone mentioned a great term, I wish I'd written it down now. Basically about fatigue in the community when you've got multiple projects in one place. It's not bandwidth, it was something else. It was about the multiple projects having an impact. Yeah. Anyway,
Community burnout.
yeah, it's not, yeah, but it's the same kind of thing.
Cumulative.
Yeah, the cumulative effect. So, where my mind went with that is in Western Australia at the moment, we've got a number of really big projects going on. And we've got a big rail project going on, and we've got in the same area a freeway extension going on. One's managed by the Public Transport Authority and one's managed by Main Roads. Do you think they are open? And one goes on this side of the community and one goes on that side of the same community. So this community is going to be hugged by construction for a number of years. Do you think I can convince them to have one type of communication where the two projects actually talk to each other and deliver consistent messaging? Very annoying. Anyway, so agencies working together. I might be able to still, I just have to win the job first. We haven't won the job. So. That's what happens when you come onto the consulting side. You actually have to win jobs, right? So he also talks about clarity. So remember I talked about clarity over certainty, the need for clarity, and you guys talked about, someone talked about granular messaging and clear messaging, yeah? Now that comes into consistency as well, so consistency of messaging, but also clarity of messaging. Really, really important. The fourth one that he talks about is character, and that's what I call this narrow voices, but also this leadership that we've been talking about, the character of the people that are leading you. And he talks about this as being a foundational root need of trust. Like you have to have a character of caring and of intent. And I think that is absolutely in leadership. Contribution, you actually have to give something back, get results. By the way, none of this session that we're doing today is only about community engagement. It's actually just about life, right? It's relevant to everything in life. I just got distracted. What was I saying? Contribution. Yeah, so give something back. We probably didn't come up with one about contribution, did we? But anyway, what else? Competency. Okay, and this comes down to some of the project manager stuff, but also the leadership. It's great to have positive intent, right? But if you're not a neurosurgeon, you can't do brain surgery. So having competent people. Now, too often we see inexperienced young people being thrown into the deep end of community engagement, and it's just not fair. You have to have competent, experienced people, and I think hopefully it's changing, but in big construction projects where you've been able to hide engagement budgets and get some really nice margin on the engagement side, that's not okay. It's not okay, and we're seeing it. So competency is really important.
Nicole, I think that links in with ego because we
Yeah.
also see leaders who are in big roles that are maybe a little bit above their
Station.
competency level,
Yeah.
but they want a safe face, and so that whole competence that they will hide behind.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the other thing is with competency is, we talked about the PM, PD knocking on doors. Some people really don't want to do that, right? They're either engineers or they're construction guys, and knocking on doors is not their thing, and it's hard. So we have to empower them and train them and help them with that. I know there's a couple of guys at Main Roads in WA who you just don't want to put in front of the community. You just don't want to. It's not always the right way. So we also have to be really careful about how we do that. And compassion. So showing that your true self, that you're actually willing to listen to other people and listen to other people's role. I think that is pretty much what we do all the time. And the final one is around commitment. It's around what one of you guys said, around being there for 12 years. So if you're staying in the same place over and actually building this commitment, you're demonstrating to the community that you're committed to what you are doing. So it started to become really clear, and hopefully I've been able to demonstrate that these 8 pillars of trust could actually be really easily associated with what we do. But I don't know about you guys, I can't remember 8 things, and I can't build a strategy on 8 things, it's too hard. And my strategy document's too long, and I don't like that. I don't like strategy documents that are long because then they go in the bottom drawer and you never look at them, and that's annoying. So Francis Frey really wrapped it up for me, and I thought that this is actually a great way of talking about trust, and I want to show you something here. So she talks about 3 points of trust, and she's a researcher as well. So she talks about logic, and actually it's rigor in logic as one point. She talks about empathy as another point, and she talks about authenticity. You've got to have the logic in what you're doing and why you're doing it. You need to be able to understand other people's perspectives and their points of view. And you need to be really authentic when you do it. Pretty simple, right? She works with organisations around the world. It's in organisational development. And she says, she goes into an organisation and finds which one is wobbly. And if one of them start to wobble, she has to fix it. Because you can't build trust without these 3 points of the triangle. Now, what is a little bit interesting is that you can actually pop these things into these things, right? So bear with me because I have to write this down, otherwise I'll get too confused. So consistency and clarity, in my mind, sits in logic. Yeah. Compassion and connection sits in empathy. And don't even try to read my writing. It just makes me feel better that I'm writing something down. And character, contribution, competency and commitment. Character, contribution, competency and commitment all reveal your authentic self. Yeah? So at the